Hello, I'm Kelly Dobbs-Mickus, and I'm an editor for MorningStar Music in the ECS Publishing Group. We're happy to be joined today by composer Luke Mayernik, an award-winning composer and organist and director of music and liturgy at St. Susanna in Mason, Ohio. Welcome, Luke, and thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Kelly. It's great to see you.
We wanted to ask you today about your most recently published work in the MorningStar ECS catalog, and that's called Missa de Octava, which means Mass of the Eighth Day. But I thought before we get into talking about that, I could ask you a little bit about yourself. Tell our listeners a little bit about maybe what drew you to music, what drew you to church music and composition.
Sure thing. I started in music at a fairly young age. I started piano lessons when I was 7. My piano teacher's name was Burl Fleming. She actually lived to be 105 years old. I started with her. And then, of course, with church music, I would go to Saturday night mass with my father's mother. Her name was Betty. And I'd go to mass with her and my grandfather. They're both deceased now. And I love the sound of the organ. I always remember the sound of the organ. It was very distinct, a sound unlike any other sound from an instrument that I had heard at that time. Mm-hmm. The organist's name was Rosemary Hayco, and she was wonderful. And I got a chance to even play at this church in southwestern Pennsylvania, and that's how I started.
That's great. And so then what led you to want to compose music?
So I always had a knack in lessons to modify, adjust, arguably ameliorate pieces that working on. I would take them to Burl, Mrs. Fleming, my piano teacher. I would change a note and a chord, change the bass, obviously altering the function of the chord. I would change certain things. I would put things in different keys. She would say, "You can't do that." I would say, "Okay." And I would obviously learn the piece the way she wanted me to learn it. Of course, that was helpful, but I did not deter me from sharing all those things with her, and I still kept it up, and that's why I'm a composer today.
That's great. I love that story. So, Luke, you have several works in our catalog, some choral pieces, instrumental pieces. You wrote a lectionary psalms collection that we'll touch on a little bit later. I want our listeners to know that the easiest way to find your music on our website is to go to the composer bio section, and they can look for your name there and read a little bit about you and then see all of the works that you have in our catalog. You also have some works with other publishers, and you have your own composer website. And I want you to tell our listeners about your most recent honor that you received from the group VOCES8.
Oh, yes. So last year, I won the VOCES8 Composition Competition. Of course, VOCES8 is a very well-known choral group, probably one of the best choirs in the world, comprising of 8 members. And they are launching their own publishing company. And they hosted a competition because they've talked about the tradition of sacred music, and it's a tradition we all want to keep alive, that VOCES8 wants to keep alive, choral music, keeping that alive. And the competition, they were looking for a short work, a standalone piece using the English language, either something in the public domain or if the composer had a relationship and permission from a poet or a text writer or a lyricist. And I set the poem by William Blake, Little Lamb Who Made Thee. And the morning that so interestingly enough, when I wrote the piece, I did not have anything in mind. There was no competition in mind at this time, because this piece was written way before the competition was ever announced. It was it was a piece that I wanted to set. So I spent one morning, it was July the 3rd, 2021, and I listened to Sir Ralph Richardson on loop on YouTube recite this poem in his very classic accent, Little Lamb Who Made Thee. So I listened to that. And, Dost thou know who made thee? And I listened to the musicianship of his voice. And I kind of got into a trance in a way. That sound of his voice, the musicality of his accent, the way he spoke the text. And the piece I started to play, and the moment I put my hands to the piano, I knew I had it. Not had it per se, but I knew it was given to me. I think that's probably the best way to describe it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I very rarely have had those instances, those scintillating flashes, instantaneous. It's interesting. William Blake said that his poetry was very instantaneous. It would happen in these white hot moments, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also the late Sir John Tavener, who famously said, he recounts in a documentary that he was in a car driving to Dorset, and his mother was driving, and he wrote that piece from wherever he was, driving to Dorset or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
again, for his experience with that text was also instantaneous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And much like the Missa de Octava, it came very quickly over a very short period of time.
All right. So let's go ahead and move to that topic, and go ahead and tell us a little bit about the composition process, how that went for you for Missa de Octava, and maybe talk a little bit about the significance of its title.
Surely. So Missa de Octava was also written in the year 2021. It was Holy Week. I started on Palm Sunday. Missa de Octava means Mass of the 8th day. And of course, in numerology, 8 means the number of new beginnings, a number of completion. So I started it on Palm Sunday. Was very, very much influenced by the music of Yves Castagnier. There's a wonderful setting of the ordinaries of the Mass that he had composed in 1980 it's just simply called just a Missa Breve. And the music ministry, the music department of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris had released during that time, that Holy Week, Easter, an album called Pâques, or Easter. And on that recording is that Mass setting, and I listened to it. And it's very short, just the setting of the Kyrie, the Gloria, the Sanctus, and the Agnus Dei. Not very long, done within the confines of a liturgical worship. They had done a video of it. I was so immediately drawn to it. At this time in my life, I felt I had a lot of conflict, spiritual conflict, a lot of things that I needed to work on in myself. I wasn't able to see the forest through the trees. And Missa de Octava was kind of a cathartic way of wanting to create the sounds of worship, the chords, the organ, how I envisioned my own personal worship to be. I wanted to write it in such a way with just the right amount of drama, just the right amount of inflection, just the right amount of like edginess. I get that a lot. Your music's very edgy, people say, or I like it. It makes me feel something, and that's good. Those things are good. Sure. And I kept that in mind. I wanted to be true to myself, and yet I also wanted to be sure that I was sensitively setting the text, which is in Latin, and I wanted to draw people in just a very deep level. I wanted to express a faith sonically, the way I would hear it and the way I would want to express it.
And so you wrote this Mass within less than 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, so it was about 10. So I started on Palm Sunday, and I wrote it from start to finish, Kyrie, Gloria, Sanctus, Agnus Dei. Started on Palm Sunday. Wrote itself. I felt so good about it, and I was very honored. And again, being so inspired by Castagnier's setting of the Mass, I too wanted to do a video of it. It was very important for me to kind of have an approachability, a very candid nature to some of the film shots. And of course, the cinematography was done by my very good friend, Mustafa, Wonderful man. He works for Apple, creative genius, and I'm still friends with him. He's such a
Mhm.
wonderful guy. He did such a great job with all the cinematography.
Yeah, it's really a wonderful video. I mean, obviously the music is very, very fine and colorful and deep, as you said. It's just a great pleasure to watch the video because you get to look at the singers while they're singing. You get to watch you play the organ, and Nicholas Will is conducting, and
Yeah.
he does a great job conducting. And it's just it's a very enjoyable, it's almost a spiritual recording. I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of times when you watch things on YouTube, it doesn't go there, but this one really does. I'd really recommend people watch it.
Oh, thank you.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that it is a choral setting and that we want people to keep in mind that this has use across denominations. So, it's published in a Catholic context, but obviously the Latin ordinary has been around for a long time and it's useful for other denominations. It's could be used for a concert. Is there anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah. So the work can be done, as you say, Kelly, within the construct of a concert. And I remember when we were first putting all this together, we had talked together about what is your ideas for this work? What are the work's intentions? And I've always seen this work as a liturgical work,
Mm-hmm.
a work that expresses the community of people. And I know that we have had conversations about this, about the role of the choir being the champions of the people,
Mm-hmm.
from among the people. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
how often we as people, we're so interconnected these days with the internet, YouTube, obviously, and all of these applications that readily connect us to people from all across the world. And of course, Queen Elizabeth just died fairly recently, and there were these beautiful ceremonial displays, services where the public and the people of the Commonwealth were able to come and mourn their queen. And there was this YouTube video of this public mourning of Her Majesty. And the choir, under the direction of James O'Donnell, I believe he had composed an Anglican chant and set, I believe it was Psalm 147. And you see the royal family come in procession, and you see the regal display, the solemn, the distinction. But there they were, standing and waiting for the choir to finish. And it was if the people themselves were a tremendously powerful thing, that a choir can bring a halt and stop a royal family and allow for them to meditate and to wait and to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, listening is that active participation. There are times where we go to church, right? And of course, we're encouraged to participate. In the Eastern Orthodox Church, the choir is that champion. There are many times where the choir and the priest, or the choir and the deacon, are in dialogue.
Right.
And the choir is they're championing the parishioners. But there are times where those parishioners will join with the choir with certain
Mm-hmm.
psalm hymns and responses. So doing this piece, Missa de Octava, within the constructs of the liturgy, which it has been done so beautifully by a really good friend of mine, Peter Richard Conti. He's the music director at St. Clement's, I think, in Philadelphia. And he's a wonderful musician. He's a happening guy. And they've done this mass setting for Candlemas, and it was so beautifully done. And yeah.
And we know it's fairly common in cathedrals, for instance, for there to be some ordinary parts that are not sung by the congregation. It's maybe not done all the time, but I know the parish I work at does that
Yes.
pretty regularly. So it's something to explore, perhaps, if you haven't done it before.
And to that point, and I'm glad you bring that up, to explore that, perhaps we as music directors, if you're a music director at a Catholic parish or wherever, probably a really cool way to kind of introduce these choral settings of the ordinaries is maybe perhaps at the Lamb of God. This way, at the fraction rite. So
Mm-hmm.
this way, parishioners even have more time to exchange peace with each other. Allow that choir to champion our communal prayer within liturgy.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we close today, I wanted to alert people, if they don't already know, about your psalm settings.
Yes.
There's something else that it's definitely worth digging into and learning about if they haven't already encountered them. So I'm talking about your lectionary Psalms collection called The Five Graces Psalter, which was published a few years ago. It has been a very good resource. We get a lot of positive feedback from it. The Psalm settings are very fresh. I think they've worn well over the past few years. We use them at my church here and there. And I just would encourage people to explore that collection if they haven't already. I know that you sometimes get feedback from folks about folks who use your settings. Is there anything you want to tell us about that?
I do. So I get a lot of messages from time to time on Facebook from colleagues and musicians from all over the country that have utilized the psalm settings within their liturgical worship services.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll tag me and they'll play and sing, and they're just so talented. And I'll tell you, I get such a huge kick out of when I'm listening to how they did it for their 9 o'clock mass or 10 o'clock mass or their vigil
Mm-hmm.
mass on Saturday. They'll change a chord, they'll alter something, and I get such a huge kick out of that. Because I'm
it
still
sounds like your
notorious.
piano lessons.
Yes, yes. So it's nice to see that music is encouraging people to push the envelope even more and to explore. And I've got a saying, because this, for me, this whole place, this world is God's realm, and it's like a playground. And not only do we have to pray well, but we also have to play well. So when I see that and I hear that, I get super excited, and I hope you all continue to do that. So
That's wonderful, Luke. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. I really appreciate it.
sure thing, Kelly. Always good to see you.
You too. Take care.
All right.